Now, there aren't many, but there are some champions in the world. Some people who stand up for truth when lies are so prevalent. And Lord Christopher Monckton stands up to climate change fanatics. He's a great guy. I'm sure I'm making him blush, if he can. He joins us now from London. How are you?
Well, I'm in fine fettle, and you won't be able to see me blushing because of the suntan I got down in Rio de Janeiro last week.
Now, yes, that's a great segue. There was a conference, a gathering in Rio, and you weren't there, I suppose, to cause trouble. Tell me all about it, please.
Well, this really was the funeral for the environmental extremists. The UN 20 years ago had held the Great Earth Summit of 1992. Leaders of the world from all over the place had gone, and everybody had had huge fun setting up a thing called Agenda-21, which was going to give the UN control of the global environment and was going to form the basis of what might eventually become a global government. And you will have heard quite a lot of voices over the last few years talking with increasing loudness and excitement about the idea of global governance, not something that the people want, but the governing class would love it. Anyway, the Rio +20 conference was supposed to be the next stage in this process of putting the environment right at the heart of the new system of global governance. Fortunately, it largely failed, and the 56-page document that came out from the conference was exactly the same document they'd gone in with, a long, turgid piece of bureaucratic drafting, concealing, it is true, various schemes to get yet more money out of the world's taxpayers into the pockets of UN bureaucrats. But overall, this conference had the mark of death upon it. It was like being at a funeral. There was virtually no laughter except among our group at the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, and our job was to go there and tell people they didn't need to worry about the climate. They did need to worry about certain real environmental problems, deforestation in Brazil being one of them, overfishing of the oceans all around the world being another. There are real environmental problems out there, but they do not require global government. They do not require trillions to be spent on trying to make global warming go away. These are problems that can be dealt with, certainly, by international cooperation, but on a limited, proportionate and affordable scale. That was our message.
It's interesting it was in Brazil, because here's a country that the economy is expanding quickly. It's becoming, in a way, almost an economic superpower. And part of that is industrial expansion, which of course must drive the eco-fanatics crazy, but it's liberating so many people in that country and giving them a standard of life they couldn't have even dreamt of maybe 15 years ago.
Well, that, I think, is one of the key points that the hard left, the Marxist left, don't understand when they produce their endless series of tedious books from Paul Ehrlich onwards about so-called overpopulation. The only countries where you'll get a very rapid growth in population are poor countries. And those poor countries that want to stabilize their population have learnt by now that the fastest and surest way to do that is to raise the standard of living of the general population. And that, of course, takes industrialization and electrification. It takes development. And that development, of course, must be done in a way which is respectful of the environment. Of course, it must be done in a way which can be sustained. You really don't need this sort of preachy UN speak about sustainable development. It's up to individual countries to decide for themselves whether and how they exploit their natural resources to bring their populations up to a standard of living that we in the West have always been able to take for granted. If they succeed, then they will stabilize the world's population, and then and only then the environmental footprint of humankind will be reasonably contained. If, on the other hand, they go down the route that the left were still trying to advocate at Rio, impoverishing those who are wealthy and keeping poor those who are already poor, that is a recipe for endless increases in global population and ultimately of widespread environmental disaster. So now a more mature feeling is abroad. Governments have begun to realize that listening to the hard left on the environment is no more sensible than listening to them on anything else, that instead proper thought and proper research should be done, and that we should not allow ourselves to fall in the hands of lavishly funded environmental factions such as Greenpeace and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. These organizations which between them spent $2 billion on propaganda, mostly about climate change, just in the United States alone last year. These organizations, which now almost have the wealth of governments at their disposal, these organizations are no longer credible. And it was very interesting. Some of us got into the meeting of ICLEI, which is the local government implementation body for the UN's Agenda-21 environmental program. These are the people who are beavering away, usually against the interests of local people and against the interests, indeed, of the environment, to introduce the Agenda-21 policies at local level in local authorities around the world. And they were saying to one another, not realizing that we were not part of them, they were saying quite openly to one another, we can no longer justify an environmental agenda using the language of environmentalism. We can't any longer use the word green, we can't even use the word environment. These have become dirty words. Why have they become dirty words? Not because the environment is in need of help, but because the left have pushed this so far that the world's population has frankly got fed up. And that feeling was very clearly conveyed to the very few world leaders who bothered to turn up in Rio. David Cameron here in Britain, President Obama in the United States, Stephen Harper in Canada, they did not go. They knew perfectly well that this was not a conference to be seen at, it was a conference to steer clear of. And this marks a very big change. And I think now, Michael, that we're going to be able to survive in the West. We're going to be able to survive the environmental movement after all. They are no longer ruling the roost. They're going to be put back in their box, and they will have to take their turn with the rest of us.
Wonderful and optimistic way to start the week and to start this month. As ever, thank you so very much indeed.